First and foremost, a nitpick is a criticism that is small, but valid. So, thanks for conceding that my criticisms are valid. That was easier than I thought. Secondly, yes, you can look at almost any given movie that exists on this planet and you will most likely find at least one plot hole or inconsistency. Nobody is perfect, and I don't expect scripts to be either. In fact, you can even find examples of these things throughout the original 3 Toy Story movies. What's that? Gaming Magic 13 said the original 3 Toy Story movies aren't flawless masterpieces? But that can't be! He pretended they were perfect in his Toy Story 4 series. No, I didn't. I have never once in my life said that those movies are perfect, as no film on this planet is. In fact, I have perpetuated the exact opposite position as recently as my top 20 best movies video, where even upon placing Toy Story 3 as my #1 favorite movie of all time, I still explicitly stated that it wasn't flawless and showed a clip from the movie highlighting its biggest and most frustrating inconsistency. Gaming Magic 13 thinks the original trilogy is flawless is a lie perpetuated by people who don't want to actually address the criticisms that I made in that series and simply resort to saying, Lamau, what a biased hypocrite. You criticize the logic of Toy Story 4 when there are logical issues also in the original movies, despite you praising them as masterpieces. Lol. So if you need me to be even more explicit, let me say this very slowly and very clearly for you all to hear. If you put Toy Story 1, 2, and 3 under the microscope of logical consistency, they will not emerge unscathed, but they will still emerge in extremely good condition. The first movie will be the most beaten up, but the other two will still have their fair share of scratches as well because they are not perfect and they have their issues. They will simply emerge exponentially less damaged because they possess far more positive qualities than negative ones. When you put every movie under this analytical lens, you will not always come out with the cavalcade of stupidity that is Toy Story 4's plot. Some movies, like that one, are chock full of inconsistencies and don't have even a single thing that makes the slightest bit of sense unless it's running off contrivance. But some movies are so impressively airtight that it's damn near impossible to poke even the slightest of holes in them. Or they have so few that they are dwarfed by the amount of plot points and character threads that do run consistently. So yes, you can break down any movie on this planet in the same way that I did for Toy Story 4, but you will get a different number of errors for every film you do that for. Not all films are equivalent in terms of a logical writing. Third, and most importantly, the simple fact that I am breaking down the events in a movie's plot does not mean I'm nitpicking it. Something a lot of people who only made it as far as my first Toy Story 4 video believed was that I spent way too long dissecting the opening scene and that it was all such small, nitpicky criticisms. You know, criticizing things like the inconsistencies with Bo Peep's dress and the driveway. Now, I'm not gonna retread old ground in this video and explain why those things make no sense. You already have that video to go watch if you want to hear that. What I want to focus on is the fact that these things are very much not insignificant details as a point of reference for the wider conversation here. The only reason why Bo Peep is able to be the action-oriented hero that she is in Toy Story 4 is because they completely overhauled the physics of how her dress behaves so that it could be detached and turned into a cape. Yes, in isolation, simply saying her dress is different sounds like a very stupid, nitpicky detail to bring up that has no impact on anything. And had it simply been the case that her dress changed from pink and white to blue and black or something, that would be weird and confusing, but also totally meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But that is in an entirely different context to what actually happens in Toy Story 4. In that movie, the reason why her dress changing is so important is because if Bo Peep still has her stiff, rigid wireframe dress from the first 2 movies, then she wouldn't be able to be a parkour expert in all of her subsequent action scenes. Hence, a seemingly small detail has major implications for the rest of the movie. Same thing with the driveway. If this driveway doesn't exist, which it clearly doesn't thanks to the other movies, and even Kingdom Hearts 3 as has been recently brought to my attention, then this entire opening scene cannot happen because Andy would never have been able to play with RC out there in the first place, and if they don't have a toy to rescue them, Woody would not have been in a position to see Bo Peep get taken away and then try to stop her from leaving in the box scene. And as a gentle reminder, this box scene is the catalyst for his emotional journey throughout the film. This emotional goodbye he has with Bo heavily informs the final choice he makes to leave Bonnie and all his friends, and it only happens because Operation Pull Toy goes off without a hitch, when it absolutely should not have because this driveway's existence is a blatant contradiction. Hence, a seemingly small detail has major implications for the rest of the movie. Do you see what I'm getting at here? If you remove any and all context from a given situation, then saying something as simple as, her dress is different, can seem like a meaningless nitpick. But when you actually bother to take into consideration the significance such a change has to the rest of the story, you quickly realize that the things I bring up in my videos are all for a very important reason. You see, a movie is like an enormous clock. It only works if all the little cogs mesh together. A clock must be clean, well lubricated, and wound tight. All these little details that may seem insignificant in isolation carry with them very significant consequences for how the rest of the story plays out. You want to know what an example of an actual nitpick looks like? You guys remember this shot from Toy Story 4? The funny haha moment where the lady screams after seeing the Chucky doll? Well, here's something you may never have noticed about it. If you look at the booth in the background, you will see that the attendant inside appears to have gone brain dead. They just aren't moving at all. They don't even blink, they just stand there menacingly, like a statue frozen in time. This is quite the oversight, and it's very, very creepy to look at, but if the person in charge of this shot hadn't forgotten to animate her, literally nothing about the movie would change. Hence, it was one of many actual nitpicks that were left out of my script. But things like this absolutely do not fall under that category. Things like the material of a dress changing, thus allowing every action scene a character partakes in to happen, or an impossible chain of monkeys being constructed, thus allowing the characters to survive, and allowing the crux of the movie's emotional core to happen are absolutely not nitpicks. You don't have to care about any of these things. Not even a little bit. They don't have to affect your personal enjoyment of a movie whatsoever. Everyone is going to value different things when they watch a film. Some people will have their immersion shattered when a story doesn't follow any kind of logic, but some people won't care about that in favor of characters or themes or world building or any number of things. You can feel however you want about any of the criticisms that I bring up, but just because you don't personally care about criticisms of a movie's logic doesn't immediately make them all nitpicks. Now, having said that, it's important to note that nitpicks are still valid criticism. There are certainly things I've brought up in the past that are so small and insignificant that if you change them, the movie would not suddenly become a masterpiece. Things like Andy looking different in Toy Story 4, or the calendar in Free Guy not having a fourth day of the month come to mind in that department. Hell, in this very video, I brought up earlier how Tony doesn't look anything like how he used to in the first Incredibles movie. Want to hear another nitpick from this opening scene that I gloss over? The Incredibles are able to transport Jack around in a stroller despite clearly not having one in their possession at the end of the first movie. These points have no impact on anything because if you were to change them to be consistent, it would not affect how the story unfolds in any meaningful way. Yet, they are still valid criticisms to point out because they are clear and undeniable inconsistencies between the two movies, and rather obvious ones at that. A small scratch on your laptop screen will not impact its performance as a laptop, yet I imagine you would still probably want to avoid it sustaining even the most minor of damages, no? I've never said Toy Story 4 is a bad movie specifically and entirely because of an impossible chain of monkeys or retcon driveway or any other individual miscellaneous logical inconsistencies or contrivances plaguing the entirety of that script. The longest sections in my Toy Story 4 videos are the parts where I go into great detail about the thorough character assassination and morally reprehensible themes the movie is communicating because those are the things that piss me off the most. But they're also not the only things I'm going to talk about because there was a lot more to how broken the movie is than just those elements. At the same time, discerning the difference between the importance of a small logic error that I spend a maximum of 1 minute talking about compared to a complete and utter assassination of one's character that I spent upwards of almost 20 minutes breaking down shouldn't be particularly challenging to do. So to simply take one single minor minute-long point that I make in that series and parrot it around as if it's the entirety of my argument is not only wildly disingenuous and inaccurate, but also hilariously ironic considering that these people will accuse me of nitpicking a movie to death while simultaneously nitpicking me by taking one small argument that I make and pretending as if that's all I have to say with absolutely zero self-awareness whatsoever. Also, to everybody asking things like, why do you care so much about a stupid kids movie that you spend 5 hours talking about them on YouTube? I have a few responses to your inquiry. First of all, specifically in regards to Incredibles 2, director Brad Bird has actually said previously that this is not a kids movie. So, you might want to take it up with him the next time you want to reduce one of his films as being merely a silly kids movie, because I somehow doubt he thinks so little of his own creation, nor do I think he would believe his movie to be above criticism even if he had tailored it towards children. Speaking of which, secondly, movies targeted towards children are no less susceptible to poor writing than movies targeted towards adults. I judge everything by the same standard. It's as simple as that. I don't give movies like Toy Story 4 a pass because Pixar has shown time and time again that they are more than capable of creating logically airtight, emotionally moving, and meaningful stories that, while not immune to contrivances or plot holes, still have far more positive attributes than negative ones, to the point where where the proportion is almost overwhelming. It is entirely possible for movies aimed at kids to go above and beyond in terms of character and plot writing, and I somehow doubt that if I were to create an incredibly detailed analysis breaking down how amazingly well written The Incredibles is for 5 hours, that you'd be saying, dude, why do you care so much about a stupid kids movie? It is of no benefit to my personal well-being to make my videos as long as they are. It would be much easier for me to crap out 10-minute videos on a regular basis in which I say absolutely nothing for the sake of making easy money. Unfortunately for my health, I have a lot to say on the subjects that I cover, which is what results in my scripts becoming as long as they are. I don't just throw in random garbage for the sake of drawing out the runtime. I suppose you could technically say that about this little tangent that I've been going on about the topic of logical criticism and nitpicking in kids movies, since it's not explicitly about Incredibles 2, but considering that it's just a kids movie or you're just nitpicking are the #1 defenses that I've seen for Pixar movies recently, I think it's more than relevant to lay down some ground rules for how this stuff works in case anyone wants to try to use those same defenses this time around. More to the point, longer videos mean more extensive and meticulous video editing, which, believe it or not, ain't exactly the most thrilling thing in the world, but I do it because I'm not interested in damaging the integrity of my arguments by artificially chopping out segments just for the sake of creating a shorter, less comprehensive analysis, especially since I do not have the power to hold you hostage and force you to watch my videos in one sitting, nor would I want to. You are free to split them up into multiple viewing sessions as you so choose. You may consume my content however you best see fit. I didn't even think I would ever need to say something so obvious like that, but something that I've discovered over the last few months is that there's a disturbing amount of people whose only view of media analysis begins and ends at long video equals bad video. Assuming that for someone to talk for this amount of time about a movie, I must repeat myself constantly and pad out the runtime with random nonsense without even bothering to actually watch the content itself before making a judgment call on it, at which point they would realize that statement isn't even remotely accurate. Finally, I would rather talk for too much time and make my arguments crystal clear than I would spend too little time on a subject and have people accuse me of not explaining myself enough. I'd rather be accused of talking for too long than not going in depth enough. Lengthy, in-depth analysis videos are what you can expect to see far more of on my channel moving forward on a hopefully slightly more regular basis than what I've been providing recently. And I am sorry about that, of course, but it does take quite a bit of time to make these things. That type of content isn't something that's going to appeal to everybody, which is fine. I can't force you to watch my videos, and I can't force everybody on the planet to like them. But for those of you that are interested in these types of videos and the topics that I cover, let me reassure you that I have no plans of stopping anytime soon.